Hi there and welcome back. Now, it's been quite a while since I posted a video on using click tracks or backing tracks in our productions, and it's the one video I seem to get asked the most questions about. And then over the past few weeks I received an email from Luke Granger who asks, would I be able to control both the click tracks and MainStage with only one PC? Or would I need one for each? If so, would I need to have two completely separate audio interfaces too? And then he goes on, also, do I have any recommendations for cable splitters? So to answer Luke's questions, I thought I'd dive a little deeper into this subject of using click tracks. If you haven't done so already, then please do subscribe by hitting the red button, and do let me know if there are any specific subjects that you want me to cover. Or contact me directly using the email musicdirectoronline@gmail.com. Now, following the posting of the last video I did on this subject, someone felt it was important to point out that I shouldn't be calling them click tracks at all, as that only applies to the track with the click, and I should, after all, be calling them backing tracks. Well, okay, but yeah, not quite. Part of this technique is using the backing and part of it is using a click. Who cares what it's called? You all know what I'm talking about, I'm sure. In essence, these tracks are pre-recorded musical and sometimes vocal backings used to fill out the sound and make it sound fuller and more professional. Indeed, such tracks are used commonly now in professional theatre anyway. Alongside the track is a synchronized click that only the band can hear to help keep everyone in time. Pre-recorded vocals are also sometimes used to augment the singing in more, say, dance-heavy productions, using the same technique. If you haven't seen the video I referred to already, you might want to take a look at that first, as it explains in detail how to go about making such tracks and how they are then played and what equipment is needed. But before I go on to answer Luke's questions, I want to explain something about having your tracks played in stereo rather than mono. I am currently working on a variety show, and for the past 10 months I have been recording musical theatre tracks for this particular production, and have put together around 2 hours worth of such tracks. While doing this type of work, you end up spending so much time because you want to get a good sound. You want your sounds to be heard in the best possible way, and that includes having them played in stereo in the venue rather than mono. But playing them in stereo may not be as straightforward for some. What I believe to be the industry standard in playing pre-recorded audio in theatres is the software QLab. As mentioned in a previous video explaining how to make vamps using QLab, you need to have the paid-for version, which can be quite expensive, to play your tracks in stereo and have a track for the click which is sent to the musicians. The free version of QLab has only 2 outputs, i.e. right and left, or stereo, that can be played at any one time. Therefore, there's no way to add a third output for any form of click, unless, like I say, you have the more expensive version of the software. The free version only has 2, a mono track in the right and a mono click track perhaps in the left. That's the simplest setup. But Luke is wanting to use Apple's MainStage, and guess what? You can play your tracks using MainStage in stereo and have a click and play your samples live if you have an audio interface with more than 2 outputs. But if you're happy with a mono track, you can still achieve this even if your interface only has 2 outputs. Now, in the last video that I did on this subject, I showed you one of these, a cable splitter, or a signal splitter to be more precise. It's just a way of getting a signal, a stereo signal to be split into a right and a left. But we're not going down that route this time. It's far too dangerous. Plus, if you've got an audio interface, you don't need them anyway. Now, before we go any further, I want to briefly and simply talk about audio interfaces. Now, there'll be lots of videos on YouTube talking about various audio interfaces, and they can seem to some quite complicated pieces of equipment, but they needn't be. Let me explain. This is my current audio interface. It is the Focusrite Scarlett 4i4. The two 4s pertaining to the 4 inputs and 4 outputs. I would very much like to demonstrate this to you, but I can't because I'm using it to record this video. So here's one I prepared earlier. It's a much older version, but it doesn't matter for demonstration purposes. It is the Focusrite Sapphire Pro 14. This also has 4 inputs and 4 outputs. 2 of the inputs are there with the gain controls and monitoring volume controls. Then on the back, 2 more inputs. But as far as we're concerned in this instance, we're looking for outputs. And sure enough, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 outputs. So one would use for our track, our stereo track, outputs 1 and 2, right and left, and then 3 or 4 would be our mono click track sent to our musicians. Right then, now it's time to bring in MainStage. Now, before I go any further, I need to explain I am no expert when it comes to this piece of software. If I'm being absolutely honest, I'm not totally comfortable with it, mainly because I don't use it often enough and therefore a little bit unfamiliar with some of what it can do. But what I have done on many occasions is use it for playing tracks. And does it work? Yes, it does. I'll be a little bit reluctant to put, say, 30 plus tracks on it and then say 100 or so patches or samples, but as long as you keep your eye on your RAM usage, you should be okay. Let's take a look. Okay then, so just as a reminder, this is a demonstration of how to use the playback function within MainStage. In other words, to play back our tracks and our clicks, our click tracks. If we go over to MainStage here, MainStage is great at supplying you with templates, but if you don't know what you're doing, some of these templates can be quite complicated. I mean, you would think because you're using backing tracks, you would straight away go for that particular one. But if you're relatively new to MainStage, you know, seeing all this can be quite daunting. So in order to try and keep things as simple as possible, I want to start quite simple in this instance. So I'm going to go with the keyboard minimalist because I'm assuming that you're a keyboard player and you want to play along with the tracks that you've created. And as ever with MainStage, it opens up with a classic electric piano. That's fine. And what I'm going to do to start with is I'm going to start adding a few patches. So let's have a look. We've got, let's have a jazz. Let's go for jazz organ. Okay, let's add another piano and a pad together. Okay, and let's just go for one more. There's a reason I'm doing this, which will all become clear shortly. Let's have some, I don't know, 80s wave bells. That's fine. Okay. Now, with all things to do with MainStage, and a concept that can be quite difficult to grasp sometimes is the different sets. So you can have, the different levels. So you can have a concert level, you can have a set level, or you can have a patch level. Now, these are all individual patches. But if we're putting together a set of musical numbers and we're going to be using tracks to play along with those particular numbers, we need to set the track at the set level. So if we go over here and we'll add in fact what we'll do is we'll select those 4 patches that we've already created and we'll go to new set from that selection. So it's basically created a folder with all those patches already in it. And what we'll also do, I think, let's call that song 1. What we'll also do is, let's create another one. No, not a patch. I wanted a set. And we'll call that song 2. And that untitled patch there, which doesn't have any sounds at the moment. Let's call it something. Oh, lovely. And we'll put that one into song 2. So what we would do when we put in various tracks in, I'm just going to demonstrate one in this instance, but we would put our tracks at this level and not try to add it at any level other than that. So it's going to be song 1. These are the patches we're going to use while we're playing along with our track in song 1. When we get to song 2, different track, of course, we've then put it in there. But it's quite important to demonstrate that it has to be set at this particular level. So going back to song 1, what we now need to do is to explain a little bit about how we're going to trigger or start to play our tracks. Now, most keyboards, most MIDI keyboards now, and certainly using MainStage, you can map an instruction like start or stop to any key or button or not slider, any button that you've got on your keyboard. Some people tend to go for separate pieces of kit altogether, and in order to demonstrate that, if we just look here, I am using a nano control. If you can see that, there we go, a Korg nano control, and it has various playback functions within it. So there we've got a play button, we've got a stop button, we've got some got forwards, backwards, record, just general playback functions that you would know on any playback device. We've also then got 8 different channels for doing all sorts of things. The only one that I'm going to use in this demonstration, I'll use that first slider as well for the volume of our track at some point. So this is the device I'm going to be used to start and stop, and I might start using these for moving the patches forward as the track is playing. So we go back to our demonstration now in MainStage. The first thing that I want to do is I don't necessarily want the clock, so let's just lose the clock. We don't want this many keyboard layers either, so let's just reduce those just to create a little bit of space. And we're going to place in here, let me just make that screen a little bit bigger, a mini playback. I'll make that a little bit bigger so you can see it. For further explanations on all what these are and how to use them, then there are plenty of YouTube videos on things like that. Something I also like when creating anything for playing back tracks is I like to use a waveform window. I just physically like to see the track going by for some reason, or if I hit that button and that doesn't move, then I know when to panic. Okay, so while we're in layout, the first parameter, this particular button here, we're going to assign, so I'll press the assign button, and now I'm pressing the play button on the Korg Nano control to assign that. And then I'll move to that particular button there, and I'll press the stop button for there. While we're here, as far as patch changes are concerned, we'll highlight that button and I'll press another one of the buttons, and that one and another one of the buttons. Okay, I also said that we would use the slider, the one slider on the nano control. So if I highlight this volume and move the slider, that's going to control our volume. Okay, that'll do for now. Back to the edit screen. So now we've set it so that while we're playing song 1 and we've got electric piano or organ, just by pressing the button there, grand piano pad, 80s wave, and then it will move to the next song. So we now got to the point where we're going to start putting our tracks in. Now, going back to the set level for song number 1, we then come over to this side of the screen. And if I just move myself a little bit to that position. Okay, we're now going to add what's known as channel strips. And even though you think you might be adding an audio channel, you're not actually. You're adding a software instrument as far as MainStage is concerned. we're going to add 2. The reason it's 2, 1 for the track, 1 for the click. I'm going to create, and this is just a reminder to say that you're creating at the set level, remember. And here we have 2 new channel strips. And because I'm quite anal about labeling everything, we're going to call the first one our track, or it might be track number 1, or however you want to catalogue your concert. And then the second channel strip, we'll call that click. Okay. The next thing we need to do is to import our track to this particular song number 1. So the instrument, as it's calling it, that we're looking for here is going to be the playback function. It's a recent one that I've used. Playback, and we're going to create a stereo output. And our playback interface opens. And it looks very much like any kind of playback device, really. We've got a play button, we've got a cycle button, we've got a back button. This bit in the center here talks about tempo and meter, which of course is irrelevant as we're using this to play back a track that already has a tempo and already has a meter. So don't need to worry too much about that. So to bring in our particular track, we go up to File here, and we go to Open File, and here is a track that I prepared earlier, and we can see the waveform has suddenly appeared. If we start to play it, make sure it plays. There we go. Okay, and then we've got to go through all that again now to import our click. So we'll go back to instrument, and this time it can be a mono output. Clicks only really need to be in mono. As before, we go to the file that we're looking for, and there is our click. Now, let's talk a little bit about clicks. In many of the videos I've done on this channel, I do talk about how important, and certainly how important for a band is to have a count in when you're conducting. When it comes to using tracks, I also have a count in, and I've recorded myself saying 1, 2, 3, 4, and an and I've made them into little clips, which then sounds like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the click will start. That's the click that I tend to use. But that 1, 2, 3, 4, I find is not a lot of work, and once you've recorded them, you can drop them into all your tracks. Bands really do appreciate it. Now, so we now have 2 playbacks, one for the track and one for the click. But we've got to link them together because they have to synchronize and play at the same time. And the way that MainStage does this, unlike QLab, where you need the paid for version, is that they put them into groups. So we have down here a group, and we've got actually over 100 groups if we wanted, but we're only going to choose group number 1, and then on the click playback, group number 1 as well. So now if I press any of these playback functions, or indeed the go button on my Korg Nano control, it will start the track and the click at the same time. At the same time, because they're both tuned to the same group. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. And there we go. Both playing at the same time. Let's just close those for the time being. And now what we would do, this is going to get a little bit main stagey now. We're at the set level. That's our playback button. And at that point, we're going to start, play from the start, that particular track. And in that button, we will stop it with a fade out. Okay, and here we will have the track with a bit of a waveform, so that now when I press the nano control, 1, 2, 3, 4, the track and the click starts, and we can see our waveform playing along here. Let's just fade that out by pressing the stop button. Now, for those of you that are slightly ahead of me, you will know, well, hang on a minute, we can hear the click as well. And this is where MainStage kind of comes on into its own, really. You don't need an expensive paid for version of QLab, because I showed you earlier your audio interface. As soon as that's plugged into your Mac or whatever device that you're using, it will know how many outputs. And so if we look down here, we will see that we have outputs 1 and 2 for our track, which is fine. That's exactly what we want. Outputs 1, left, 2, right, whatever. But the click here, if we press on there and we go to our output, we could send it to outputs 3 and 4, or if we're in mono, we just want to send that one to output 3. And depending on your configuration as to how you're going to send your tracks to the front of house system or to your sound guy, will depend on where that track 3 actually goes at this particular point. So now if we press our nano control, we just hear the track, we don't hear the counting or the click, but we can see down here that it still has an output, and it's going to output number 3. One thing that I didn't do, and I promised I would, is we will map this to the volume. There we go. So now if we play our track, we can control the volume of it by using the slider on the nano control. So I hope that was a little bit of an idea as to how we can use our tracks in stereo. MainStage, unlike QLab, is a lot cheaper. It's used, of course, by we musicians, particularly keyboard players. While that's playing, we can work through all our patches in the normal way without changing the fact that the track is still playing. Like I said before, I wouldn't normally use a lot of tracks in MainStage. And the reason I say that is that QLab is made for audio, and if I'd got a production, which I have in a few weeks' time, that's going to contain about 40 or 50 different tracks, then I would tend to use my my keyboard, which is this fella, the Roland RD800, and I will use those particular sounds for what I'm going to be playing, rather than MainStage, hoping that MainStage is going to deal with the tracks and with the playback itself. If you've just got a set of, say, 10, perhaps 20 tracks, then MainStage is fine for using both. Okay, we've had enough of that. It just gets bigger. I hope that helps. One final note. Playing to a click track can seem alien to some players, and some drummers particularly can find that it isn't as easy as it first may seem. But if you have a drummer that's comfortable with playing to a click, and depending on the nature of the track, the band can usually play along with the drummer. I'm lucky. I have a drummer that's excellent and more than comfortable with having this in his ear for 2 hours. See you next time.